We wanted to start with some introductions to put things in context as to who we are and where we work and our experience, because it might be a little different than a lot of people here if you're from the commercial space. So I do work for Northrop Grumman, and that means we are government contractors, and I love the opportunity working for Northrop because I get to meet with so many of our wonderful government customers and agencies and such a wide, vast group of products and services that we provide, all the way from DOD and intelligence and cyber. I've also supported healthcare. Yes, there is actually a small part of Northrop that provides services and product development for our healthcare organizations under Health and Human Services. So if you've heard of like Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, SSA, and we also group IRS and DHS and other areas under that same organization. So we also have, of course, submarines and planes and a lot of different areas that we are working in and trying to take this message and take these practices across the organization. I do run Northrop Grumman's Agile Center of Excellence, where we're looking to build some commonality in terms of the practices and infrastructure that we are implementing in support of Agile and DevOps.
I'm Robin, and I am at Lockheed Martin. So very similar to Suzette, I'm an LM fellow. I work pretty much across all of our lines of business, so everything from aeronautics to submarines to satellites, which is pretty interesting. And we do have a number of projects that have gone from Agile back in 2003. Now we're really heavily moving into DevOps. So on programs with 10 people all the way up to our largest programs, which has over 100 teams and 1,000 people. I pretty much work, like I said, across the organization, and it is really interesting, but as we give you examples, you'll probably see why some of the challenges are what they are.
So to address some of the organizational challenges, and again, these are probably things that you're seeing in your organization, is the feelings of fear, some resistance to change. Am I still going to have a job when we start implementing DevOps, or is my job going to go away as we start automating? Along with how do we even scale this across the organization? So one of the challenges is how to grow this with enough subject matter expert support in supporting our programs, because we have hundreds of programs supporting multiple agencies and government locations. So how do we continue to grow the skills of the people? Because even though we always talk about hiring the best and the brightest, and we have a lot of wonderful, talented people, but we also have to continue to grow what we have internally, because we can't always hire our way out of this. But how do we take the good people that we have and give them the skills and the training that we need? And I think one of our biggest challenges that we face in terms of DevOps adoption, even once we get past the infrastructure and the skills, is we don't always own all the way into production. So we have different contract vehicles that we have to work under. And sometimes our DevOps means we can only take it up to production, because then it is somebody else who owns that. So then we have one of the challenges of how do we get through that gating process and work with that other organization, which could be a government entity, or it could be another contractor that we have to work with, saying, you know what, we're doing this DevOps thing, but we want to take it over that gating process, and then it requires us working with that source to help them understand the value, and then is it even within our contract to collaborate?
So Suzette's not wrong. We often are competimates. That's usually what I call it. We're competing on things at the very same time that we're actually working together. And I think this is kind of a brilliant segue into that, is usually we have to work together. This solution is too difficult in the government space to not play nicely in the sandbox, right? So things that we have to do, communicate vision, and we've got to make sure that our government customers are hearing the same message, because they're in the same boat we are, and quite honestly, they're still learning. So if I say one thing and Suzette says the opposite, they're like, who do I listen to? Me, of course, but I mean, I'm just saying. right? But who do I listen to? How do we overcome some of these? Some of the things we've been doing is trying to dotted line, right? I'm still in a very much a functional organization. The government very much often, is putting out contracts where maybe I'm only doing operations, or I'm only doing test, or I'm only doing development. So having to work on communication with our fellow partners is important. And then sharing across the organization. So I might learn something really cool on Orion and say, hey, this is working with that team. And say, okay, so how about F-16 pick that up? I think that one of the things that we do have the benefit of is being able to see across the organization. So when things are working in one really large piece of the organization, being able to transfer that across.
And I think one of the things that we both have, and this is how we've discovered just through talks, is our Agile community of practice. So we both have an Agile community of practice where we're sharing those DevOps and Agile experiences, but that is what helps bring the whole organization together. So it's not just my part of the organization, but no matter where you sit, if you're in an remote location somewhere, you're still able to call in and learn about the experiences from others across the organization. I think that's extremely valuable to carry those lessons learned. And then if somebody is struggling in a certain area, whether it's automated testing or test-driven development, they know there's a resource they can reach out to.
Awesome. All right, so teams. I'm gonna start with our challenges. Biggest challenge we've had is, we've had a set of jobs for the last 20, 40, 60, 100 years, and now they're changing. Right? So then the skill sets are changing. And I don't have the ability to only take, the people that have a lot of commercial experience in this. I have to take the folks that we have today and work with them to transform them into being those Netflix guys, into being those Spotify guys. Right? So that's been a huge challenge. Trust, believe it or not, there's not a lot of trust in the government. I'm just saying. I don't know what's going on. So I have to spend a whole lot of time trying to get them to play nice together and earning those trust points. Or I heard earlier today, trust equity. I loved that. And building cohesive teams. Now, I keep telling everybody, didn't you actually have to play on a sports team in high school or middle school? Believe it or not, there's some of my engineers who haven't. I'm just saying. So it's practice.
Yeah, and building on those challenges, right, and creating these cohesive teams, what I found is as we've moved to an Agile DevOps kind of implementation and programs, that we're actually having to teach how to build teams, right? And in some places it comes very naturally to have this cohesive, high synergy team, and it just kind of happened organically. But I'm finding it doesn't happen organically everywhere. So we actually, as coaches, which kind of tied into our first slide about having coaches available in the organization that can go and work with those teams and not only help them with the skills that they need to transition, but also the team skills. So it's not just the technical skills, but the teaming as well. So coming up with a strategy like that and training and in the education, so I know both of us, we have a sort of internal training programs that we offer, and we work with our teams to kind of build that structure, both again from the infrastructure side and from a teaming, let's work together and collaborate. I think building the trust has been the hardest, but one of the things I tell people is that one way we build trust is by delivering and demonstrating results. So getting them very focused on results and having them regularly show something working has been very valuable, and that's one way that we can help build trust in the organization.
So a great example is I had the opportunity to work with a couple of our aeronautics teams, and their leadership had decided they were going to go Agile, and they didn't really tell them why. They just said, we're going to do this. Now, these aeronautics engineers, believe it or not, have been here for 30, 35 years, and I show up and I'm like, have I got a deal for you? Yeah, so they were so happy. Not. So we started talking. I said, I understand that you're special, because that's how I know I'm at Lockheed. If you're special, your problem's different and it can't be done, I know you're there. And I said, but for grins and giggles, how about you guys just try this for 6 weeks? It'll make everybody happy, and then you can throw it away, because we're definitely all about making sure that we're delivering, the process isn't the goal. Now, the most amazing thing happened. That team was supposed to deliver in 13 months. They came in at 6 months. They delivered using half the budget with a record number of low defects hitting hardware integration. But the coolest part was the end, right? So I had some of these engineers, again, 35 years, and I know I'm not very young, but to them, I'm a whippersnapper. And they were like, you know what, if we have to go back, we want to go to another company because I've never had so much fun building something in my life.
Right, and with one of my first teams, this was in 2005 when we transitioned to Agile. It was a large data collection system where we were collecting information to give to our military folks out in the field to make good decisions. So part of that, it was really important for us because we knew we had to have the ability to react quickly and get information out quickly. So what we had initially in 2005 was chaos. Basically, we gave everybody a book to read and said, okay, now we're Agile, and we realized that doesn't really work that way. So, yeah, reading a book is it's a little more complicated. So we did get training, but the interesting thing is watching how it grows because we had so many integration and testing problems. We had huge bottlenecks. I mean, like 3-month bottlenecks at large scale integration and test. And what I mean by large scale is my team of 125 people, our product integrated with another 5 to 10 products. So there was just this growing thing of software, kind of like inventory, growing at the large scale INT level. So what we learned really quick is sort of this Agile mentality has to permeate all the way through the value stream, or are you going to keep getting these bottlenecks? So now that same team, though, that had these huge bottlenecks as they're implementing this more Agile DevOps kind of implementation, where they're actually taking continuous integration and automated testing all the way through the system up to production. We haven't been able to get where we can constantly release into production without a gating security process. But we're there, and they run over 15,000 tests a day, and the amount of improvements, and that to me is part of what all of this is about, is never being satisfied with the status quo and always trying to learn and improve. So that team is still together 11 years and making improvements. So it's fascinating to watch that.
All right, so some lessons learned. Training is not enough, and neither is just reading a book. Having people really engage and understand why it's important to them, what's in it for them. Systems thinking, I just was talking to a group of folks a couple weeks ago, and they were like, well, we'd rather just have all the systems engineers work together because they know each other and what they're doing a lot better. So, well, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to develop a lot of systems engineering artifacts, you're right, that is going to have economies of scale. But if your goal is to actually get something out the door, then actually that's not going to work so well, right? So really, kind of repeating that over and over and over again has been a big thing for us. And then kind of showing line of sight. Where's the path, right? So I used to tell people, okay, we want to be here. And they'd be like, oh my God, there's that hyper girl again. We have just got to go, right? So I listened heavily to Alyssa Adkins, read her books, etc. And she always says, be a half step ahead of the team. So I started looking at, okay, so we kind of want to be here. But next week, maybe we want to be here. Next month, we might want to be here. And then it turned it into a much less scary proposition. Because when I was just showing them the end state, they were pretty sure that would never work.
Right, so building the infrastructures. So it's been interesting to me. So everywhere that I have kind of worked as I moved around in the company, once we start looking at infrastructure, for some reason it starts becoming all about the tools. And we have to remind people that there are still people and process around these tools. Although we do need the infrastructure in order to make this happen. That is very critical. And having the right infrastructure. So trying to identify, in our situation, we have to have several different solutions because we have so many different types of products, different types of programming languages that we use, and different customers, which sometimes dictate to us what tools they would like for us to use. So we have to comply with that as well. So we really have some challenges around building the infrastructure, but so one of the things that we start doing, I guess which starts leading into strategy, but is to come up with these common frameworks that then we can tailor and help get set up quickly in these environments.
Absolutely right. There's frequently the customers are telling us exactly what we need to do, or you know what, the other team is sure that the previous team didn't know what they were doing. So developing common frameworks. The other thing I really am trying to focus on with our guys, and I'm having varied levels of success depending on the line of business, is focus on the data architecture underneath. Right? So tools are going to come and go. Technology is changing at the speed of light. If I really focus on the data I need underneath and the metrics associated, then quite honestly, I can sit different tools on top all the time, right? I don't have to dictate your user interface, and I can still keep the teams moving and being successful. So we've been trying to work heavily with that. Design patterns, and then build it and they will come. So guess what? If you build an integrated tool set and you sit it out there, and there's a new program, there's no program manager worth their salt that says, you know what, I think I'd rather spend 8 weeks and build our own with our own cost rather than pull it along, right? So that's definitely been something that's helped us quite a bit.
Right, and one of the things too that we've learned in terms of infrastructure, it's been very interesting what people think DevOps is. So going into some places, they might say, oh, we're DevOps, and you start asking questions, and you realize that what they're saying is they've started doing continuous integration. Sorry. We've had this conversation before. But then I realized, okay, this is a learning and growth opportunity, and maybe what we should do is really start building on what successes you already have. So what I like to do is let's draw out your environments. Let's talk about what you're doing already. You know, what are different environments? What tools are you using? How far are you pulling continuous integration and continuous delivery? Where is your final point of control? Meaning, again, contractually, how far can we take it? Can we take it through to production? Or do we have to stop to ready for production? And we draw out that picture, and then we highlight all the great things that you're doing, because we want to build on that success, and you're already doing great things. The last thing we want people to do is, talk to them like they're doing bad things or they're not good enough, because they are good enough and they are where they are, and for good reasons. And we want to build on that success and just carry it a little bit further and a little bit further.
So what's the lessons learned? If you shortcut the infrastructure, it's a problem, right? There's lots of times where we're talking to customers and they're like, you know what, we're going to go all Agile, and we'll do some of that DevOps thing too. We say, hey, so how about your test automation strategy? And you're like, yeah, we don't have time for that. Cool. All right, so don't shortcut it. Just like Suzette was saying, respect the past, right? What are they doing today? People are working as hard as they can, and if you start kicking them after everybody else is already kicking them, you're getting nowhere. So respect where they came from, and then say, hey, how about this idea, as opposed to you're doing this wrong. Make sure that you're partnering with configuration management. We have a huge configuration management organization at Lockheed. Now, quite honestly, I can tell you that I was one of those developers that would try to get by them, right? I have to get stuff into operations. I really just don't have time for this huge amount of process. But we can't do that. So really coming back and trying to bring them on side. And then, like I said before, the pre-integrated tool sets help quite a bit.
Right, and I think one additional challenge that's related to the lessons learned that we face that is kind of unique to us is because we work with so many different agencies and entities, is really understanding the auditing and compliance processes for each of those entities, and making sure as we're building in this infrastructure that we're also going to meet all the security and government requirements, and automating that where we can, so that when we are or should we be audited, we can point back to how we've met that need with our infrastructure.
That's a good point. It comes back to that trust. Believe it or not, the CIA does not use the same auditing process as the NSA, who doesn't really think that the FBI is knowing what they're doing, who is sure that the NRO doesn't have a clue. So it's amazing how there's all these little idiosyncrasies and that none of them are doing it the same way. All right, so big challenges. How do we measure success? Now, a lot of times I still got folks that are saying, hey, you know what? If you're 100% busy all day long, that means we're successful. Doesn't necessarily mean we got anything out the door, but you were in your seat all day. right? How to get that data, how to extract it, right? So begin with that question and understanding what the results are telling you. You know, I've got program managers that are running around saying, hey, we got 80 points last sprint. They don't know what it means to their schedule. They have no idea when they're going to deliver to the customer, but boy, they just learned some new lingo and they know they've got 80 points. So they need to know.
So I think too with challenges, one of the things I always like to talk with the teams or organizations that I work with is what story do you want to tell? And then what metrics are we going to use to help tell and reinforce that story? And in addition to that, the other thing that I like to look for is how happy are the people on the program, because when things aren't going well and we're having to work really late nights because of something we put into production or we've hit integration and test and we haven't tested all those interfaces with the other components or products that we need to interface with, that we know then we have some improvements that we need to make, especially in our testing and automated testing process. So really looking at the metrics around testing, because as I see my work being done, I should also be measuring that against increased automated testing results as well.
Absolutely agree. So that's one of the strategies we have. I usually first try to understand the mission. Always good to know what people are actually trying to get out of. Believe it or not, it's pretty funny. I run into a lot of teams that have actually never read the contract. But apparently that's not that important. You know, again, understanding the data structure and the tools behind it, reviewing those results from multiple perspectives, because, you know, I, as a development organization, might think I'm doing great, but I've got 12 things that are sitting on deck to be actually deployed in operations, which has happened on many cases. So are we really doing that great? Maybe not. And really understanding what success looks like. So I learned this from Suzette. She was telling me, you know, she does team safaris, right? Brings teams to go see other teams that are doing a good job. I was like, ow, well, if Northrop's doing that, we got to do that.
That's part of the reason we do this, is because then I go back to Northrop and I'm like, did you hear what they're doing at Lockheed? We need to step up our game a little bit.
Motivates them a lot. So good example, right? We were building a multimodal biometric system for one of our classified customers, and their whole goal was, you know, we have a ton of these requirements, but what's their real goal? They want to find bad guys and hide good guys with biometrics, right? So getting the teams to focus on what is the real end goal and how their work aligned to it was a really big deal. Now that project we went on to actually deliver into the customer space with security clearance in 6 months, which is amazing because accreditation can take that long itself.
Right, so I think it's really important too, looking at lead and cycle time, because I know there's been times where we felt really good about our process when we were only looking at cycle time, because we were getting things out quickly. But the challenge was once we started looking at the whole lead time and how long it took from a need coming in to getting to production and looking at that kind of full end-to-end process, it wasn't quite as pretty. So we really looked at making improvements, and we've done this in a couple areas where how do we shorten that time from need to production, and how do we reduce sort of the requirements review process, because we do in some cases have review boards that we have to go through. So how do we improve in those areas, and so we can have a shortened lead time, so we're getting needs out. We're not just delivering on a regular cadence into production or production ready, but we're actually pulling that whole cycle a little bit shorter. And you don't really know that unless you're looking at both of those metrics.
So I absolutely agree. Frequently we do look at things like cycle time, and then when we realize somebody wanted something 2 years ago. I hate it when that happens. Believe it or not, technology changed too. So really understanding that. Another thing that we have a tendency to do is when somebody does something wrong, we're like, off with your head. I'm really trying to get people to say, hey, wouldn't it be great to just shout success and say, hey, good job, because then people might be willing to try a little harder and try something new. If we chop off their head every time they do something new, it's a problem.
So we've modified that phrase where it says fail fast, because that really scares a lot of our program managers, right? So we've kind of modified that. It said fail fast, learn early. and talk about how important it is to learn early, because there is a cost savings around that early learning process. And you know, some of even our DoD Army customers have appreciated that as well, as we show that maybe this certain sprint or 2-week cycle or whatever didn't go so well, but we've learned so much from it. It was so better to find it now than when we get to a large-scale integration and test environment, because the cost would have been so much higher. So I think there's a lot of lessons from that as well, and talking about what are the metrics we're looking at, and then while sometimes everything doesn't always go perfect, that there is something to be learned from that, and there is actually a cost savings around that as well that will make our PMs, our program managers, happy.
So how many times have you gotten to tell a test pilot that we're all about fail fast?
Exactly, yeah.
They love that, right?
Yeah, that's also why sometimes we don't continuously push into production.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for some of the products we build.
So with that, I know we're over our time. I think the one thing I wanted to ask you guys for help with is really how to get those business cases. That's the #1 priority that we spend at the company. Every time I say, hey, let's do this, they say, tell me why. Tell me what's in it for me. So if you guys have any ideas on how to get bigger and better business cases, please share. Do you have anything?
I think the one thing that we're struggling with a little bit is because things are growing so rapidly, both in terms of Agile and DevOps, and while we have coaches internally, and we're trying to teach as we go, but how do you continuously build that model when things are growing so rapidly? Because I think that's been a challenge.
Awesome. So thank you.
All right, thank you.